Hello and welcome back. We've been going through the Bible, starting right from the beginning, right from Genesis. We looked at creation and we saw what God was hoping the world would look like and what he designed it to look like, all these things to fulfill human beings. And then we saw the destruction of pretty much all those things that were meant for our fulfillment. And God finally called a man named Abraham, basically said, Abraham, no matter what you do or don't do, I'm going to use you and your family line to make everything the way it was supposed to be. And there was a problem there. Abraham had no children. God took care of that, and he said, Abraham, I'm going to give you children that outnumber the stars of the sky, right? Descendants, not him having personally that many children, but descendants that would outnumber the stars of the sky. I'll give them land to live in, the land of Canaan, and all the other nations of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. Well, finally, after 25 years after God gave this promise, God gave Sarah and Abraham a son named Isaac. The promise then will get passed on to Isaac. Sarah was barren. That's why it took so long for her to have children, and God waited a long time to fulfill that promise. But finally, there's Isaac. He marries a woman named Rebekah, and Rebekah's also barren. So Isaac prays, and she has a son, but not just one, she has twins. The first twin to come out, the firstborn son, was Esau, and he would be the one then to inherit this great promise. The second was Jacob, whose name means heel catcher. The idea is a deceiver, somebody who deceives and strives after things that elude him his whole life. And Esau and Jacob are at odds right from conception. And we left off in the last session talking about how Jacob actually deceived Esau out of this birthright, and that included this promise that God made. It was supposed to be passed from Abraham to Isaac to Esau. Now, instead, it's passed from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. So the fathers of the faith, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, here they are. Not all great moral characters, as we've seen in the other sessions. Well, Jacob, he ran off because his brother wanted to kill him. This is not the wonderful, healthy family that we should model ourselves after. So Jacob ran all the way up north to Mesopotamia, and he's staying with his mother's family. He falls head over heels in love with Rachel, a beautiful young woman, and they get along great. They love each other. They're flirting with each other all the time, and he works 7 years to marry her. And we left off seeing Jacob, the deceiver, get completely schooled by deception. He was deceived into marrying the other daughter, Leah. Leah, he just had no desire to be with Leah. She just wasn't up to Rachel's standards, right? Just really had no interest in Leah at all, but was deceived into marrying her. And once you're married, right? You've made that covenant, and people took covenants extremely seriously. Marrying multiple wives was not unusual, was not uncommon, unless you were very wealthy and you had a whole lot of servants, or just, if you had everything you needed, maybe you were okay, especially with servants. But usually people grew crops or they kept cattle, and that was their food, in most cases crops, and you needed a lot of people to work the fields. And if you're not wealthy and you don't have a lot of slaves, well, then you better have a lot of children. And so it was not uncommon for men to marry more than one woman so that they could have a lot of children to basically keep the family alive. So not everybody did that, certainly, but it was not an uncommon thing. So he married Leah. He was deceived into it. And then he married Rachel, the woman he really loved, deeply and passionately loved Rachel. So they marry. And keep in mind what we've talked about culturally, that the biggest blessing for a woman is to bear a male child for her husband. Rachel, like her grandma, well, not grandmother, but they're all from the same family line. Sarah, Abraham's wife, was barren. And then Rebekah was from that same family. She was barren. Now Rachel and Leah both are from that same family, and Rachel is barren. There's probably some weird genetic thing going through the family, keeping some of these women from having children. But Rachel was barren. She couldn't provide that child for her husband. But Leah, on the other hand, she's just popping out babies one after another. And this would be a huge blessing for Leah. I'm not going to get into the Hebrew names, but they have meanings to them that are very significant for what the name means has to do with what's going on in the world or with the parents. So Leah, she has the blessing of providing the firstborn son for her husband Jacob. And she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. And so she named him Reuben. And the Hebrew word Reuben would have to do with that idea of being unloved. The whole situation she was in there. So then she conceived again, and she said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And so she named him Simeon. She conceived a third time and said, now surely my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. And they named him Levi. She conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. And she named him Judah, and then she stopped bearing children. And it's almost like that fourth child, she's kind of learned, and I mean, keep in mind, years have gone by here. She's kind of learned, my husband is just not going to love me no matter what. I'm going to turn my attention instead to the Lord. And then she stopped bearing children, and she seemed to be kind of okay with it. It's like bearing children for my husband is not going to get me love. And what I really need is the Lord. And she ends up seemingly, at least, to be okay at that point. Not that it was okay that Jacob didn't love her. He was treating her like dirt. But she found ways to actually kind of deal with life in spite of the setting. Well, Rachel, on the other hand, who Jacob absolutely adored, she was barren. And she approached Jacob and said, give me children or else I will die. And Jacob's looking around at his 4 sons saying, I'm not the one with the problem here. What, am I God that I can just make you able to have children, right? This is your deal. And kind of threw it back in her face. They had this huge blowout. So finally Rachel says, look, I have a servant Bilhah. Go sleep with her and have children by her. And Jacob, of course, says, oh, good idea, okay. And he goes and sleeps with Bilhah. Now, that was Rachel's way. If she could have a child, even if it was through one of her servants, she could adopt that child, and the shame of being barren and not being able to provide this great thing for her husband, that shame could be taken away, at least on some level. So Jacob says, good idea, and he goes in and sleeps with Bilhah. She conceived, she bore a son, they named him Dan, and then apparently Jacob enjoyed it because he went and slept with her again, and she had another child named Naphtali. Well, Leah sees that Rachel is having Abraham sleep with the servant and have children through the servant, and this competition, the competitive sense kicks in again, and she said, oh yeah, well, I can do that too. So she's not bearing children anymore, but she has a servant, and so Jacob comes home from the fields one day, and he's on his way over to Rachel's tent. Leah says, not so fast, you're sleeping with my servant Zilpah tonight. And Jacob says, oh, okay. And there he goes and sleeps with Zilpah. Zilpah bore a son for him, and they named him Asher. They named him Gad. And the Hebrew pronunciations are a little different. It's actually God in Hebrew. A lot of these Hebrew pronunciations of the names are very different. I'm using the English pronunciation, so not everybody gets all confused, especially this one, because if I called him God, then when I talk about the child, God, we'd get confused with God. So bear with me. I have some students who English is a second language, and most of them pronounce these names far more accurately than I do because I'm using English here. But apparently Jacob enjoyed Zilpah as well and slept with her again, and they had another child. This one was named Asher. Then there's this little negotiation between Leah and Rachel, and Leah sort of buys the rights to sleep with Abraham again, and so Abraham comes home from the fields, and he's on his way to Rachel's tent, and Leah says, tonight you're with me. You are mine tonight. So he goes back home with her to her tent, and God remembered her, and she actually conceived again And this time she bore a son and named him Issachar. Then she conceived yet another time and had another boy, named him Zebulun. And after this she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. So Dinah may be, once all this is done, she may be the only daughter with 12 brothers, 13 children altogether. It's also possible, though, Dinah plays a specific role in this narrative. And usually, in a narrative like this, in this culture, only the men would be listed. And there's a cultural reason for that. But Dinah plays a certain role in the story. So it's possible that they had quite a few other daughters among them all. We specifically know of Dinah. So there could be 13 children total. There could be a lot more than 13 total. But what we do know is that there are at least 13 in total, and 12 of them were boys. So there are 12 sons of Jacob. Well, finally, God remembered Rachel, and God opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. She named him Joseph, saying, May the Lord give me another son. That's great, God. Thank you. Now do it again. So, of these 11 so far sons, Reuben is the firstborn, and Jacob should be just lavishing Reuben with everything as the firstborn son. But he really didn't care about Leah at all. I mean, he really neglected her, treated her like dirt. The slave girls, he was providing for them, but they were the slaves of his wives. Rachel is the one he is madly in love with, still, after all this time. So she finally has a son, Joseph, and Jacob sees Joseph as like the best thing that could have ever happened to him. The firstborn son of the woman that he loves, her flesh, right, her blood, and he's going to lavish Joseph with everything to the point of ridiculous. And the brothers from the other wives, the other woman, they get pretty jealous. So much so that a lot of us teach our children, don't use the word hate. When the children are young, don't use the word hate because it's such a very strong word. Well, these brothers hated Joseph. The way he was treated compared to the way they were all treated, they absolutely resented and hated him, and they want to get rid of him. Well, Rachel finally has this child, and some interactions happen here, and I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit because there is another child born. His name is Benjamin. Rachel conceives again, and this time she gives birth to Benjamin, but there are complications. And when the child is born, the birth process ends up killing Rachel. Rachel dies while she's giving birth. And she actually names the child Son of My Misery. Jacob renames the child Son of My Right Hand, which is what Benjamin means. So he's Benjamin. So this woman who Jacob has been head over heels in love with for so long is now dead. And Joseph and Benjamin are her two sons, the two children that she bore for Jacob. And Jacob is going to lavish them like never before. So everything that has already been causing the hatred and the resentment, it's going to get much worse. Well, Jacob is getting deceived left and right by Laban. Right? So he has these 12 sons and at least one daughter, and he makes up his mind, I got to get out of here. Laban keeps ripping me off. He keeps changing my wages. I'm doing all this work. He's trying to get all of the profit and leave me with as little as possible. And now he has this family. He's going to head out. He's got to leave. And where will he go? Probably back home. But remember, his mother, Rebecca, said, when it's safe to come home, when your brother makes up his mind that he's not going to kill you, he lets down a little bit, his anger eases a little bit, I'll send for you and I'll tell you it's okay to come home. He never got that message. So he's taking a huge risk by leaving and going back down into that area. But on the way, Laban realizes that he just took off. Laban chases him down, and they exchange words. and God sort of intervenes there, protects Jacob from Laban. But they keep going, and Jacob sends some messengers out, and he wants to find out, how is Esau? Is he still preparing to kill me? Is he still that angry? Is this a mistake, going back down there, or should I find someplace else to go? So he sends some messengers around. They scout out the whole territory. They find where their brother Esau is living. And if you remember in the last session, he had a nickname. His nickname was Red, or Edom. He actually was doing pretty well for himself. He moved down to the very southern part of what we would think of now as Israel, the southern part of Canaan, underneath the Dead Sea. And he became known, his family line was growing. He had a lot of children. They were having children. They would eventually become known as the Edomites, and that whole territory was known as Edom, named after him. So Edom, or Esau, he's doing pretty well for himself. The scouts from Jacob find him. They come back and give Jacob a message. We found your brother Esau, or Edom, and he's coming to meet you, and he has 400 men with him. Now, that's not great news of a wonderful reunion that's about to happen with his brother. This means to have 400 men with you means he's not only done very well for himself, but he has a small army. And that army is coming not to greet him and congratulate him for his life efforts and whatever. They're coming to kill him. They're coming to go to war with him and his family. And Jacob, he had a lot of possessions when he left. He had some servants, he had wives, he had children, a lot of cattle, a lot of stuff. But he didn't have an army. He's going to get slaughtered. And he knows this. So this deceiver, Jacob, he splits his family up into different sections, splits his wealth and possessions up, sends line after line of gifts ahead so that when Esau is coming north, he's greeted by some of the servants offering gifts on behalf of Jacob. And this happens again and again. And then he's split his family up. He sends Rachel last of all, hoping that if Esau comes and kills the first group, that maybe they'll relent and not kill anymore. And if they do, they'll kill the second group, and then maybe they'll relent. And by the time they get to Rachel, hopefully they'll be appeased and just let them live. Or maybe they'll just, kind of turn around and go back before that. It's sort of like a last-ditch effort. And very significant, though, that Rachel is sent last, right? Benjamin obviously hasn't been born yet. I jumped ahead to talk about the 12 sons. So right now there are 11 sons. Rachel is still there. And he sends them all ahead. He stays by himself on the other side of a stream. So there's a stream running east to west. He sends his family in different sections across that stream and down into harm's way, really. And he stays behind, the deceiver, right? He's not leading the way. He's not the first one they're going to meet to try to appease his brother or even fight his brother, and hopefully the rest of the family will escape unscathed. No, he stays behind on the other side of the river. It's dark. At best, there's a little moonlight and maybe a little light from the stars. That's all the light that he's going to have. Maybe he may have lit a couple torches. That's it. It's really dark. And out of nowhere, this man shows up, and they start wrestling. So what in the world is going on here? Why is Jacob wrestling with this man? Well, back as an undergrad in college, I lived in an off-campus apartment with some guys. And two of the guys were gone for the weekend, and the other two of us knew that they were gone. Well, the third was still there, but I thought he was gone too for the weekend. I thought I had the place to myself. He thought I was gone for the weekend, and he had the place to himself. I was out late. He was home, at least earlier than I was. He locked everything up. I came in, I unlocked the doors. I came in, shut the door behind me, and you kind of know your way around your place, so I didn't turn on the lights or anything. I was just going upstairs to my room. Well, he heard the door open and close, and the lights were not on, and he heard somebody walking around, thought it was an intruder. I heard somebody walking down the stairs. The lights were still out. I thought it was an intruder. and I heard him coming toward me. It was one of those fight or flight scenarios, and there wasn't really a way for me to get out and away too easily. So I just prepared myself for the worst. I came around a corner this way, he came around a corner this way, and thankfully he flipped on the lights so that when he attacked this intruder, he'd be able to see. Thankfully, he turned those lights on before we both rounded that corner, because otherwise we would have pummeled each other. We were both terrified, really thought we were, it was just one of those fight or die type situations. Another time, I went for a short run. I would go out jogging once in a while at night. Not real long, just up to the end of a street and back. There were a lot of bushes around and some street lights and stuff. And it was a relatively safe neighborhood, but you had to kind of still watch your back a little bit at least. So I ran up to the light, and I'm paying attention to my surroundings, but still kind of in my own little world. Get up to the light, I turn around and come back. And as I'm running back, I heard footsteps behind me, and I didn't think much of it. It was a big apartment complex. There were people around. So I really didn't think much of it, but I was just aware. And I kept running, and the footsteps started getting a little faster and came sort of in my direction. So I just made a little mental note, just pay attention to this. The footsteps got closer and faster and closer and faster, and they turned into a run coming right toward me. And I'm watching the shadows from the street lights, and I could start to see shadow, and just said to myself, I'm about to get jumped. I don't know what's happening or why, but I'm about to get jumped. And I waited strategically till the footsteps were right behind me, and I turned around and spun, ready to strike. And it was that same roommate. He hid in the bushes and waited for me to pass and snuck up behind me. He was going to try to jump me and scare me. I almost pummeled him. I'm surprised the two of us are still alive, really. But we survived. But when you're out in a place like that and you are about to be attacked, or even you perceive that you're about to be attacked, the adrenaline kicks in and you're ready to fight for your life. And here's Jacob, already terrified, in the middle of nowhere. It's dark, and out of nowhere this man appears and attacks him. He's fighting for his life, right? Jacob is just fighting to stay alive. And he doesn't know what's going on, and in the heat of the moment, you don't stop to rationalize what's going on. You just fight to stay alive. And this went on and on until finally there was light over the horizon, like the sun was going to come up soon. And this man, he saw that he had not prevailed, and he said, I'll read part of the passage here. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he had not prevailed against Jacob, he touched the socket of his thigh. So this man just touched it. The word in Hebrew can actually refer to a gentle kiss, right? It's not like martial arts move and a pressure point. This is just, he gently touched the part of Jacob's thigh, and Jacob was instantly crippled. And at that moment, Jacob realized, this is not an ordinary man that I've been fighting. And Jacob ended up continuing to wrestle with him, even though he was crippled. And this time, Jacob is clinging to the man, not to save his life, but to keep the man there with him. Because he realizes, at that moment of being crippled, he realizes who this man is. The man said to Jacob, "Let me go, dawn is breaking." But Jacob said to the man, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man said to him, "What is your name?" Now remember, your name defines you. Your name is your very identity. Let me jump ahead just a little bit in the passage here. Jacob, after this whole interaction ends, Jacob named that place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been spared." This man, we find out, is God himself, appearing in human form. And very often in Scripture we'll see angels appear. If an angel of the Lord appears, it generally is just that, an angel. Where the angel of the Lord, specifically the angel of the Lord appears, it's God. And as we go through the rest of the journey, I'll point these things out and show you why I say that. But for now, just know that this man, that Jacob was wrestling is actually God himself, the angel of the Lord, God in human form. So Jacob has said, the man said to Jacob, let me go, dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you blessed me. Jacob realized, I've been fighting for my life this whole night. All this man had to do is touch me, and I would just fall over crippled. This is not a man. This man has everything that I've been striving for and deceiving for my entire life. And he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Because everything that I've needed, everything that would fulfill me, everything that I've ever wanted is summed up in this man's blessing. And the man says, what is your name? And Jacob has to say, my name is Jacob. Or in other words, the man says, who are you? What is your identity? And Jacob has to say, my fullest identity is the deceiver. I am Jacob, heel catcher, deceiver. And the man says, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Now that's not referring to this wrestling match. The man is saying, your name will no longer be deceiver, but Israel wrestles with God. Because you have been wrestling with God and with men your entire life, and you finally at this moment have overcome. You've realized that everything you've been striving for and deceiving for and longing for is summed up in God. And because you've overcome, your identity is now changed. You're no longer the deceiver, the heel catcher. You are now one who wrestles with God, Israel. Well, Jacob asked and said, please tell me your name. And the man said, why do you ask my name? And he blessed him there. Never told Jacob his name. Just said, why do you ask my name? And it's almost as though this man is saying, you know exactly who I am. And it's right after that that Jacob says, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. And Jacob left that place limping. He was crippled. Well, he still has to face his brother. And he's divided his family. He's sent everybody ahead. He's sent his wealth ahead. He's sent gifts over and over again, this round after round of gifts to Esau. Well, why gifts? Partly the obvious reason, he wants to appease his brother. He wants his brother to just kind of say, all right, maybe Jacob's not that bad. He'll let his guard down a little bit. And it works. But it's not just that. Remember what Jacob did to Esau. Remember why Esau wanted to kill him in the first place. Jacob deceived Esau out of everything, stole his birthright, stole this massive blessing from God. What he's sending ahead, he's basically saying, I've become wealthy. God has made me wealthy. And I'm giving back to you what I stole from you. He's trying to make restitution for it. And it works. By the time Esau gets to Jacob, he's like, oh, this guy is just pathetic. He's pathetic. His guard is down, and they're able to actually stand by each other and embrace for the first time in many, many years. They reconcile. And Esau actually says to Jacob, come stay with me for a while. I'm really doing well for myself. I have my own city, basically. Come stay with me. I'll take care of everything you need. You won't have to worry about anything. Just come. I would love to really reconcile more fully. And let's talk about what's happened over the time we were away and really catch up. And Jacob says, I would love that. But you go ahead. I'll catch up with you. And Esau insists, please, just come back with me. We'll talk along the way. And Jacob says, look, you're here with 400 men. And he looks over at these soldiers. And soldiers, by the way, get paid at that part, at that time in history in that area. They get paid by the plunder that they take from a battle. And these guys were looking for some plunder. So Jacob looks over at the 400 men, and he's like, you know what, you got 400 really men in really good shape. They're fit. I have a bunch of women and children and cattle. The children, all the cattle, they're going to just slow you down. You go ahead. I'll follow behind you. I'll catch up to you. And Esau says, well, at least let me leave some of my soldiers here to protect you. Jacob looks at these soldiers who are now growling at him because they know they're not going to get any plunder from a battle. He says, "No, really, I insist. You go ahead. I'll catch up." So Esau reluctantly leaves. He goes back down south to Seir, or now Edom. And Jacob, who is going to go ahead and follow and catch up with him, decides to make a right and cross over the Jordan River. He never goes to visit his brother. He basically just deceived his brother again. God has just said, "Your name will no longer be Deceiver, but Israel, one who wrestles with God and has overcome." And in the very next passage, he's called Jacob again. And there he is, back at his old way of deceiving. It takes a while for that change in identity to kick in, and it did for Jacob. Well, some horrible, tragic things happen to Jacob and his family, and we'll take a look at those things in the next section.